If everybody could move down towards the middle or to the end. Getting a little late start tonight, I apologize. We just wanted to try to get everybody a chair, but I think we're out of chairs. So, I have a quiz for you tonight. I'm Terry Horn. That's not the quiz. I'm the director of the Center for Civic Engagement. And Quint's not here tonight. He's, believe it or not, he takes time off, and he's actually on vacation right now, although email sometimes wouldn't know it, would you, Andrew? So he is in New York, I think. So what is the strongest town in America? Yeah, Pensacola. If I can figure out how to work this. There we go. We were the Strong Town winner. Strong Towns is a nonprofit that exists to create a model of what a strong and resilient city looks like. And of all the cities across the country that they selected to compete, I think there were 16. There were votes week after week, and I think it was about a week ago, Pensacola was named strongest town in that contest. And I think that's a testament to a lot of what's been going on in Pensacola for a while. I wanted to share with you some of the things that were notated by the judges, if I can get my glasses on. They talked about a remarkable turnaround in the past decade in downtown Pensacola, a growing population, a dramatically expanding local economy and tax base, all created by focusing on the historic downtown. Mixed-use housing showing up downtown, it being a more walkable downtown, rehabilitation of vacant sites, amended codes to promote pedestrian-friendly design, thriving and unique local business culture, lively, safe streets, neighborhoods to promote every generation a good home, entrepreneurship and civic involvement, the Civic Con series to engage residents in urban planning by learning from national experts and converse with locals about the city's challenges, and then training and professional development programs and networking resources to ensure that local entrepreneurs can succeed. So we should be very proud of this, and we're going to help the city and others find ways to promote this and let people know about what a great place it is that we live. So just a reminder that the Civic Con is a partnership with Pensacola News Journal and the Studer Community Institute, and its focus is to make this a better place to live and do business and for all of us to prosper. Wanted to share with you the results from the last Civic Con. I think probably many of you were there with Peter Kageyama. We had the highest rating for him as a speaker in the Civic Con series. So we had 6,300 live streams. We usually average about 5,000. So Peter, Lisa suggested at P&J that maybe it's Peter's reputation around the country. Haven't spoken at other places. People just love to hear that positive story, so they tune in wherever he's at. And I just really like Peter as a person, but he had a great positive message. And one of those positive messages was about a love note. And the very next day after Peter spoke, somebody in the community suggested that, you guys down at Studer Community Institute should do a chalk art festival on your new plaza and your new building. So that's going to happen on May 25th, a love note to Pensacola. That same event, that one's open to everybody, open to the public. It's going to have food trucks and games. We'll have professional artists that'll do art on the plaza, and there'll be an area for kids to do their art on the plaza. I hope it all comes up, Andrew. So you worked real hard to build that beautiful building, so or restore it. CivicCon Potluck Social is just invitation only. Anybody that's on our CivicCon email list, we're going to ask you to come that same day, May 25th, from noon to 2. Bring a potluck dish, and we'll do an old-fashioned block party, all of us together. And it'll be an opportunity for me to get to know all of you to get to know each other better, and just to spend a little bit of time. We'll have a very short program. Got the results back from the classes that were suggested, and we'll be launching 7 classes right away, and I'll be sharing some of that between now and then, but the full curriculum at that event. And we'll have a nice, pretty handout to give you. But Civic Con is alive and well. We have other speakers planned for later this year. We're waiting to get final confirmations on dates with a couple of them. So tonight, I'm going to have DC come up, and because he's been the point person from the beginning, DC Reeves. He's Chief of Staff for Studer family of companies, to introduce the SCAPE people and kind of give you a background of how all this started and how we got to this point. First, are there any local elected officials here tonight? Could you stand up, please? Thank you. Thank you for coming. So, DC?
I'll let you slide by me so you don't fall off the front there. First of all, happy Earth Day. I would like to claim that we planned this like a year in advance. I was joking with Lee that, of course we're going to roll out the SCAPE plan on Earth Day because that would be the right way to do it. Yeah. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Unintentional consequences gone right. So I'm DC Reeves. I'm Chief of Staff of the Studer family of companies, and I've, as Terry mentioned, I've been the liaison, I guess, for this SCAPE project. And if anybody had asked me before how much I knew about the water in Pensacola, I'd been like, I swam here a lot. That's a start. I grew up in Perdido Key on a canal, and so needless to say, it's been quite an education, and I've been thankful to just be a part of learning so much about the community that I grew up in, and for Lee and Gina and Liz and James and the whole SCAPE team being part of this project has been really exciting for me, and even standing up here now, seeing how hard they've worked and what a brilliant presentation that they have. It's kind of like, you've already seen the magician do the performance, and you're excited to see somebody else be wowed by something that you've seen. So I'm super excited to get started, so I won't take long. I did want to give a quick background on kind of how we got here. Civic Con was, of course, most of you know, a lecture series that started last year, and Christian Wagley, who was in charge of picking Civic Con speakers, had turned us on to SCAPE, and so Gina and Lee came down and talked about waterfront resiliency and did a charrette here of our waterfront, and it was so impressive that Quentin Rishi Studer really supported it financially, but it's been a collaborative project with the Pensacola News Journal, certainly now with the Center for Civic Engagement, and said, let's bring them back and try to do the most comprehensive study that's ever happened on this waterfront downtown. So I'm a former journalist, so I would like to have more backup to say this, but I'm also okay with hyperbole, which it might be the most comprehensive study of our waterfront downtown in 450 years. So somebody may have altered information, but I'm going to stick with that as a nice newspaper headline. And if it isn't, it's one of the best for sure. And so again, I'm excited for you guys to check it out. The city of Pensacola, we should mention too, although Quentin Rishi kind of started this process, the city of Pensacola and Mayor Robinson and Keith Wilkins back there also jumped on, and they actually extended the search area all the way down to where we sit today. It initially was at Joe Patty's, and so the city, so what you will see tonight that has anything from this building to Joe Patty's was part of their contribution. So thank you to the city of Pensacola for seeing the value in this and being a big part of it. Round of applause for you guys. So they're going to go through a couple things, and I will let them tell you in much more expert way than I will. They will talk about the framework plan, which is what they've completed. And then they're going to roll out the 2 catalytic projects, which has been part of this proposal the entire time, to say, what are they going to dig deeper on? What's next? And so The framework plan is where they've been, and there's so many people in this room that have given them feedback, whether it be last time here in January in focus groups, on the phone. I know we've got to be over 400 people that have been able to chime in on this. So many of you that are out here right now. And so certainly thank you guys for that, and thank you for all the standing room support in here as well. What I want to do before I have Gina and Lee come up, to kind of talk about some of that feedback is, you probably saw that James Lima is going to be here, who's part of the SCAPE team. He has his own, economic, I call it placemaking economic, firm. And even though you guys probably know Gina and know Lee, be it in the media or being at one of these, in the past, I wanted to give James a chance. He's done such impressive work, and you'll see some really awesome data that you're going to learn something about Pensacola tonight from all the work that he's done. So really quickly, before Gina and Lee came up, I wanted to read a little bit about James. James Lima has been actively engaged in complex matters of real estate, economic development, and public policy since 1986, with extensive private and public sector experience in the planning and revitalization of urban places at a variety of scales. James founded JLP&D in 2011 after leading redevelopment strategies for numerous large-scale sites as a partner at a major national economic and real estate advisory firm. Additionally, James was appointed by New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg as founding president of the Governor's Island Preservation and Education Corporation, overseeing the redevelopment of a 172-acre former military facility in New York Harbor. Lima has also served as senior vice president for special projects at the New York City Economic Development Corporation, where he managed initiatives focused on growth of the city's central business districts, including downtown Brooklyn, and increasing public access to the city's waterfront. His prior work as assistant commissioner of at the New York City Department of Housing, Preservation, and Development, and at Forest City Ratner Companies, centered on new construction of affordable housing and retail development throughout New York City. He earned a bachelor's and master's from Columbia College, where he later served as an assistant adjunct professor. And at the Harvard Kennedy School, James participated in the program for senior executives in state and local government as a Fannie Mae Fellow. He's a frequent speaker at Urban Land Institute and other conferences, has served on advisory panels throughout North America, and has lectured on urban redevelopment at Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Columbia, Penn, and Syracuse, as well as in Rotterdam, Amsterdam, and Sao Paulo. James serves on the Economic Development Committee of the 4th Regional Plan for the Regional Plan Association in New York. He is a member of the Design Trust for Public Spaces Design Trust Council, and he also serves as secretary of the New York Harbor Foundation. So as you can imagine, when you hear that, you were excited to let him have his first opportunity to come talk to you guys here in Pensacola. So we'll hear from James in a minute, but I'd like to welcome our SCAPE team, Gina Worth and Lee Altman. Or just Gina first.
Perfect. Well, thank you, DC. That was quite the setup. I can't promise that we've made the most comprehensive waterfront study in the last 450 years. That seems like a claim I was not ready to substantiate this evening. But I do hope that what we've been working on is beneficial and impactful, and a kind of document that can really help make change in this community that benefits all of the residents of Greater Pensacola. So we're really excited as a collective team to share our work. I'm going to talk through some of our work this evening. I'm going to ask James to come up to present some of his research, and then Lee will also be joining us for the Q&A session at the end. So there will be time to kind of hear from everyone. And we have a lot of additional materials around the back of the room. And I really hope everyone has a comment card. Feel free to expand upon that, but we really want to hear your feedback on this plan. We're really seeing it as a working plan and working document that we're going to develop over the coming weeks as we work both at the scale of the Pensacola waterfront and at the scale of these catalytic projects. Also, I see a lot of people standing. We do have kind of quite a hefty presentation to talk this evening. And so, feel free to fill in some of these empty chairs that are here in front and around the back. There's a bunch of empty chairs like all around here. So please keep it informal. Again, a huge thank you to Quentin Rishi-Studer, as well as to the mayor, to Pensacola News-Journal, and all of you who have participated in many of our community feedback sessions. The work that you see this evening is not just a reflection of what SCAPE and James Lima think about the Pensacola waterfront. It's really a collection of what you and your community leaders feel the potential of this place holds. So we really appreciate the generosity of you offering your time and coming this evening to kind of listen to this work and this synthesis of what we've been hearing. So here is the Pensacola waterfront. It's, as we know, it's an incredibly diverse array of activities, of cross-sections, of ecological functions. We can see some of the different conditions along the waterfront. These are simply drone images of the waterfront today. We see small-scale boating. We see large-scale recreational spaces, park destinations. We see like large maritime activities happening along the waterfront. We see kind of amazing like ecological habitat niches occurring, oyster reefs, barrier islands, marshes, as well as new destinations like Bruce Beach being opened up to this community. And we also see tourism hotspots, places that almost anyone who visits the town of Pensacola comes to visit, like Joe Patty's Seafood House. There's an incredible array of assets that already exist along the Pensacola waterfront. But I think one of the most kind of undiscovered and kind of assets that holds the most potential is the water itself. I think people are innately and intuitively drawn to water. I know as soon as I came to Sanders Beach this evening, I really wanted to be out on the pier as opposed to standing up here talking to you, because it's such a beautiful evening. The water is so evocative. Looking at the waves kind of lipping and crashing along the edges of the bay and the way it changes the morphology of this whole area and how it's really formed the bluffs of Pensacola. This is what really makes this place special. This is what draws people to the beach of Pensacola, but also the bay, and it's kind of at the core of why this city is even a city, its location along the waterfront. And so this is what we're really here to work on today, is to think about how to really utilize the waterfront as an asset and invest in it as an asset that defines and frames and connects your community. I think you've seen these goals before in our last presentation. When I was here earlier in the year, we talked about these as aspirations for this project. And in our comment cards, we're asking you to evaluate us. Have we met some of these goals? What do we need to push further? Which projects kind of most kind of purely shape and fulfill some of these goals. But a primary goal of this work is to create a more connected public realm that connects all of the assets along the downtown waterfront area to the greater region. It's also to highlight and celebrate the local ecology of Pensacola's bay itself. Has a very unique ecosystem. This layered complex of oyster reefs, mudflats, and marshes line the perimeter and line the edge and are surrounded by the historic remnants of bluff systems, which are quite beautiful and quite special to the region. We see huge opportunities to leverage economic development and public space investment, something that James will be speaking on, different strategies and mechanisms for investing in the public realm in a way that will benefit diverse constituency of Pensacola. We want to promote equity and inclusion in public space, really make sure that what we're proposing and developing is something that it does not only create future space for all people of Pensacola, but really reflects upon the rich cultural histories of the city itself and embraces those multiple narratives. We've been seeing this project as a new model for outreach and civic engagement within Pensacola, so trying to find different mechanisms to speak with all of you and your neighbors and your elected representatives and your city officials. And we've really also tried to develop a vision plan for the waterfront of Pensacola, which is truly transformative. We really think this would make a huge impact for your community, but it's also grounded. We think it is implementable, and it is possible to actually action these strategies and move them forward in many different ways. So at the very end of this presentation, I'll show some of the strategies that we think you can implement now very easily with very low budgets and kind of small tweaks to the system. And we'll show some projects that we think will take a little bit more effort, a little bit more investment, maybe longer term planning and thinking. But we think all of these have value and that there is certainly capacity and interest and passion in this room and in the wider community to execute this effort. Just a reminder of where we've been and where we're going. So I see many familiar faces here this evening, so I really appreciate many of you returning to the Civic Con presentation to see our update and continue to stay engaged in the process. We were here at the end of January and early February in the same room presenting on our aspirations for the waterfront, and we heard a lot from this community and the wider community about what was desired along the waterfront. And now we're back. Here we are. And here we're beginning to define catalytic projects and concept ideas for projects to study and take further. We will be developing these ideas at a more granular level, these 2 projects that we've selected, through May and June, and returning to present them as a kind of final document and template for how to move this project forward. So what we've been doing in the meantime, so we've been working quite a lot in the SCAPE office, very actively on this project, having many meetings, both here in Pensacola, but also meetings back in New York. We hosted the mayor and Quint for a work session in our studio, which was a lot of fun, but we've also been talking to many of you. So at our last workshop at Civic Con, we had over 190 participants engage and provide feedback. We've been meeting with different technical, local, and environmental experts to understand the feasibility of some of the ideas that we've thrown around. We've met with a wide variety of local property owners along and close to the waterfront to really understand some of the attitudes and interests around developing these properties differently. We've also met with high school students. We had a really great session at West Florida Tech to understand not only what older residents of the community desire, but younger residents desire. And this is something James is really going to speak on, this kind of concept of what ties people to a place and keeps them in a place for a long term. What makes young people want to live here and stay here. And we've also met with a wide variety of community leaders, and we're looking for more people to talk to make sure that we're engaging the right folks, being in the right rooms, and meeting with the right communities to really have this plan reflect the broad constituency and diverse constituency that is the city of Pensacola. So this is just the first step because we're going to keep doing this work. Some of what we heard is actually laid out on some of the tables, the flat drawings on those 2 circular tables in the back there. So if you're interested in what your fellow community members said about your local environment, I would go take a look. We've translated it all back to the maps. This happened through a number of sessions. Some were here in this space, some were in other rooms. We have a number of key takeaways. Relating to connectivity and circulation. We heard a great deal about how people wanted to get to the waterfront but had a hard time literally getting there, or had a hard time parking and walking, or felt like there was not a strong connection or a strong active passageway to move from point A to point B. We heard about a great need and desire for safety along the waterfront, to slow down, to have less car-dominated space, to have more bicycle-oriented space, to have more pedestrian-oriented space, and really accommodate a diverse range of mobility options along the waterfront. Create ADA and American with Disabilities accessibility standards access throughout the entire waterfront edge. Create places where it's easy to walk with a 2-year-old along the waterfront. We all, at different stages of our life, have different mobility needs, and right now the waterfront is not meeting all of those. We also heard about takeaways for ecology and hydrology. I think a lot of the local members of Pensacola really feel that there's a great desire to express some of these local ecosystems. We've met with some members of the Native Plant Society and learned about the robust diversity of vegetation that lives along the coastal edge. We've heard a lot about integrating stormwater features into the urban landscape and really building on new technologies for adapting stormwater into the urban environment in a way that is environmentally beneficial. And I think a big takeaway was people really want shade in this community. It's beautiful today. It's so pleasant to walk along the waterfront, but I think probably in just 3 or 4 more weeks, it's going to become very, very hot throughout most of the day. And so shade was something we heard. We heard it from the high school students. We heard it from elected officials. We heard it from community members. Shade, trees was greatly desirable. So you will see a lot of trees in our plan and a lot of reconfiguring of the urban street fabric to encourage shade and healthy tree growth. We also know that residents of Pensacola are really thinking about the future and the future risks that the city potentially faces. And so there's a high number of areas and zones that were identified as potentially vulnerable over time. And I think the good news is that the time to start planning for this vulnerability and really thinking about a more resilient coastal edge is now. And there are the people in the room to really make that happen. So these are images of some of the different tools that we use to speak to the community, to speak to all of you. We had presentations, but we also had some model making sessions and work sessions. We used activity cards with many of the different groups. So we did some of these activities with high school students and the same activities with many of you. So we try to just kind of see how different people would respond to the same questions, the same set of questions. And we also heard that people are really interested in more activities that really serve a much broader audience, both an older audience and a younger audience along the waterfront, an intergenerational approach to public space making. And so I think that's one of the key things that's driven our plan, as well as this kind of desire and opportunity to really pull some of the energy of what's happened downtown, especially along Palafox and some of the retail corridors in the downtown, to really pull that energy to the west, to Sanders Beach, to where we stand today, to really have the waterfront be a united and connected public realm. And so with that, that's a little kind of preview into what we heard from all of you. And while we've been doing a lot of listening, we've also been doing a lot of research and thinking and trying to understand what does make Pensacola great, what does make Pensacola strong. And so James is going to come up and share a little bit of his research on Pensacola. And this, you can really see how this work has influenced the direction of the waterfront plan that we will get to after his section. Thank you.
How's that clicker work?
The screen is not good.
I'm not wired. Is this working? There we go. Okay. That's forward. Good evening. It's great to be here. I'm from a historic port city with an ocean, except we have winter. But our history as a place by the sea that has a really rich and long American history and United States of America history is a very proud part of that community, and it's certainly a really proud part of this one. And it's absolutely remarkable that this many of you have come out to listen to, wonks like us talk about urban planning and the future of cities. So it's really exciting to be working here and to be collaborating with the city and with the foundation and with SCAPE. And we've learned a lot. I'm going to talk a little bit, mostly at a higher level at this point. My role is to talk about what we call the economics of placemaking, which sounds a little bit like a oxymoron in a way, right? But in some ways, it's the softer side of economic development. But for our practice, it's really foundational to thinking about how to get things done. And I want to talk a little bit about how some of these exciting ideas that you're going to see after I stop talking from SCAPE about the potential of your waterfront might get paid for and might get some economic momentum to kind of back them up, right? So first of all, what is place, right? So one of the tenets of our work is that we know that unlike in the old days when a corporation would decide where it wanted to locate, usually somewhere near where a CEO lived, now people have choices. More and more people can live anywhere, and so companies are following talent, and capital is following talent. And talent is following place. So, what is place? Well, so what is the human experience of place? In this way, each one of you is as much an expert in answering this as anyone else, right? So what makes us decide to go to the places we go to when we're with family, someone's visiting, or with friends, we go back to again and again. And we don't just go there, we behave a certain way, like we have an idea of how we're going to experience that place, right? So a lot of the work that we do is district scale planning. And so what we've done right from the beginning of our work here is to think about the waterfront district and your downtown district as an experience, and to kind of take that in and say, what's really working here, and where do I feel the disconnect, or where there's some barriers, where there's some opportunities. But it's this idea, and there are so many things we could talk about tonight. Just retail alone and the role of life on the street is a really important aspect of how this downtown and waterfront will continue to mature. But we're going to talk at a kind of a higher level tonight. But this idea of animating public life, the ways that we come together in civic places, in public gathering places, has always been important in every settlement that's ever been created, but it's increasingly important now, right? In a social media environment, in a smartphone environment, like we are craving connection and belonging. So these places, these gathering places, are even more important than they ever were. But I want to talk for a second about this idea of loops. And I think you know what I mean. Like when you go to a place, you probably know, like I'm going to go antiquing, and then we're going to stop for lunch, and then we're going to go to this park, and then we might take in a view, and then we might sit in a sunny spot and have a coffee, and we might do some entertaining or see sports or watch kids at a playground. There's this series of what I call rewards along those loops, and the disconnects and the problems that happen on waterfronts and in downtowns is sometimes we'll get to a spot where the loop just peters out. Or you see 2 long blocks of like asphalt parking lot and then a drive-through bank, and you're like, I'm done. Like I am no longer continuing on this loop because there's no reward ahead of me that's worth walking in the sun, in the heat, or whatever it is, right? So when we know there are rewards of going out on a pier and like having that moment and looking back at the city, we do the things we do because there's a payoff. And then the idea of perches. We love perches, right? Like a place where you can sort of unplug from your walk, your loop, and just take in the world going by. People watching, going to a cafe, even if you're alone, you're still connecting to community. And that's really important as a way of thinking about the life of a district. To bring that to more of like real estate and economic terms, a lot of the work that we do is about literally physically connecting assets to each other. The things that are already here that for whatever reason are not very well connected. So often a university is up on a hill and it's not really connected to increasingly vibrant downtown. And if you could just get those two things to interact a little bit better. Or a university is completely outside the core of a downtown, and lucky for you, UWF has just like increased its downtown footprint with some new exciting tech-oriented uses that we're going to talk a little bit about. So connecting assets to each other, connecting park spaces to each other, the idea of this trail along the waterfront that SCAPE's going to present. Creating vibrant communities by creating more mixed uses. More and more downtown residents is always going to be good for downtown. It's interesting to look at community by community where the option to not live downtown is pretty appealing for a lot of people who want a single family home, who like having a backyard, who like having their own space, or maybe haven't found the right housing choice in the downtown. So creating more housing options, particularly for younger people who don't necessarily want to have a home. They don't even want to have a car. So, like, how do we create more choices for more people? And guess what? In the next 20 years, we're going to have more than 20 million people over the age of 65. And we're all living more vital, vibrant, healthier lifestyles. We don't necessarily want to just go to the options that used to be available as you age. People want to age in place. They want to have more active senior lifestyles. And so what are the housing choices for aging adults as well? And how can that be part of thinking about downtown? The idea of creating great places and great access to waterfronts and these civic spaces is a proven real estate value creator. So we will talk a little bit about how proximity to great open space and parks is proven to increase real estate values by 20% and more at a minimum. And in some cases, significantly more. So the park near where I live, the High Line in New York, has generated more than $6 billion in new investment in an area that used to be an industrial zone that felt like the edge of the city that you just didn't go to. And now, in some ways, it feels like the center of gravity, at least the center of tourism in New York. So government and the private sector are pretty good working together to create parks and finding money to build parks in these open spaces. What they're terrible at is capturing the value that's created by doing that and using it for purposes that are important to the collective community. So the opportunity here is to not only think about, like, what are the places that we want that are going to really amplify all the best qualities and attributes of what we imagine our waterfront and our downtown being, but what are the ways we could create a mechanism to say, capture a portion of that incremental new value that is created by being near a great park. That creates market demand that isn't there today. And how do we capture some of that value through assessment districts or tax increment financing or these other tools that are available, and redirect some of that captured value to achieve your goals? And that could be forever are your priorities, but the idea is to try to capture it so that it's creating even another layer of public benefit. So Pensacola has an opportunity to increase employment, diversity of the economy, and attract and retain talent. Now, we were asked to look at the value increase, the value creation opportunity of creating great public space. We've taken a step back and said, we really want to understand Pensacola's economy. So we're going to do a kind of a quick run through of our assessment of where you are in terms of your regional competitiveness as an economy, your place in the regional economy. Why does that matter? Well, you're going to be successful as a downtown. The small businesses that exist in the downtown, the number of hotel rooms that you can sustain in your downtown, the amount of business activity along your waterfront, the amount of tourism that will be attracted here, in part based on the size of the workforce that is downtown, but also the number of people who live and go to school and visit downtown. So we want to create more opportunities for that to thicken, if you will. And so that's going to have to require more job opportunities, right? We have to create more jobs in and around the city for that to be true. So you've got some assets that contribute to vibrancy, right? You've got things that are in all likelihood not going away anytime soon, right? The military, a huge economic anchor, huge. And you've got a major academic presence, and you've got a huge healthcare footprint. And you have a brand around tourism that's extremely attractive. So those are all really good starting points for vibrancy. The opportunities are to increase tradable sectors. In other words, business that exports things, make more things and produce more things that other people want in other places, and to increase innovation. And then on livability, you've got obviously a waterfront, the beach, boating, arts, and incredible amount of culture already. The opportunities are around connectivity and inclusiveness and more housing choices. Did I go too? My screen is acting funny. So we looked at Pensacola relative to its region and looked at gross domestic product. And so your GDP per capita is somewhere in the middle, where red is a low growth rate and green is high. You're somewhere in the middle, so relatively flat. You're surrounded by competitive players in the region, and you're experiencing average growth in terms of productivity. Okay. But you're doing better over time. Escambia County is catching up with the Florida statewide average on GDP per capita growth. So, let's figure out ways that Pensacola can be part of that growth strategy and maybe overtake the state average. And then in terms of innovation, we looked at patents per 10,000 employees. And so again, where green is high growth potential and red is poor, you're somewhere in the middle. So in terms of innovation, you're underperforming. Other cities in Florida can potentially provide learning opportunities and maybe even spillover. So it's worth looking at what is it about some of these other high growth areas that are probably, very productive partnerships between academic research institutions, venture capital, private business, and government. Again, historically, your innovation economy has been relatively weak, so more targeted focus on this. We had a great session earlier today specifically about cybersecurity and the potential opportunities around that. And this is important. So you have a pretty healthy percentage of students for a small city, and historically, you have had a relatively high number of young adults in the community, but it's decreasing. And it's a concern. So what we looked at is college-age population versus young adult population. What is the relationship between the young adult population and those who are finishing school? In other words, are people staying after school? And I think you probably know the answer for the most part is no. But I'll bet if you ask most of those people, would you like to stay? They would say, hell yes. People want to stay. We've been doing work for Google and Facebook in California. And Google has outgrown its Venice Beach headquarters, where they have surfboards. And they are not happy about the fact that they have to leave Venice Beach. Again, millennials want to be in a place that's interesting, authentic, distinctly that place. And if you can be by the water, even better, right? So you can see over time, since '98, you had 29% young adult population, and now it's down to 25%. So that's a 15% decrease in 20 years in young population. We have to figure out how to do more, create more access to economic opportunity, more entry-level job opportunities, more job training, more career pathways, more investment in workforce training, but also grow the overall economic footprint for the city. Again, to create more vibrancy in the downtown, to create more opportunity and allow people to stay, but also new people to come in. And this is a problem throughout the country right now. We're at an extremely, almost historically low unemployment rate everywhere. Now, particularly where there are jobs in tech that have pretty specific skill requirements, there's a huge labor shortage. We heard today that just in cybersecurity alone, there's 1,100 unfilled jobs in the region. So it's a problem. And so your economy is really benefiting from your kind of strength in tourism. But in terms of an overall ocean economy, which is much bigger than tourism related to proximity to water, you have a historic port, which means you have bulkheaded waterfronts that you could never create today, at least not in most communities because of regulation. There's an opportunity to take at least some of that bulkheaded waterfront and think about the next generation economy. So what if your ocean economy included innovation in food science and ocean exploration and marine research, and that those were part of the career pathways for young students who are so enthusiastic about becoming environmental stewards and to create more opportunities through the work you're doing with oyster farming and reclamation and exploration of the ocean floor. That also can tie into all the Department of Defense work that's happening with, undersea defense systems, underwater drones, advanced manufacturing of carbon fiber materials and other exploration devices. So there's a real opportunity to both take advantage of your unique location as an oceanfront community, the fact that you have a port downtown, and the fact that you have Department of Defense, and you've got a research university that has marine science and other undergraduate and graduate degree programs. Another opportunity is to say, well, we might not have it today, but if this is what we want to become in the next 10 years, let's talk to the president of the university. Let's talk to the chancellor of the university. Let's go to our congressional delegation and say, we want more resources for our future as a center of blank. Decide what it is. So think about the ways that you want to grow the marine economy. It's absolutely the wave of the future. And then the businesses and research institutions more broadly should promote advanced technologies across different sectors and disciplines. In other words, even in your ocean economy sectors, there are a whole bunch of ways that you can tap into the new opportunities for new economy. And again, this is going to be a partnership between government, academia, and business. And part of what you can do and what your economic development strategists can do is to figure out what that framework looks like so you're ready to capture the opportunity that another city, another place is going to be ready to capture. How can you compete? So now we're going to drill down into like more of a city analysis. We always try to encourage our municipal clients to think about ways to grow what we call tradable sectors. And I won't belabor this, but in other words, blue, you want more blue. You don't have a lot of blue. The U.S. average is 36% tradable sector. That means tradable sector is a sector of the economy that is producing things and exporting things. So it makes sense that you're significantly orange and local because you're heavy on hospitality, heavy on health service, financial services, education, real estate. Those are all considered local services. Those are not exports, right? So we want to work to figure out how to increase distribution in e-commerce, more advanced hospitality and tourism, different kinds of transportation and logistics, and business services. But again, a lot of that advanced manufacturing and other like research-based stuff is an area to focus. So this is a goal. Cybersecurity, a huge opportunity for you. It is an area where there's probably the greatest expertise anywhere in the country, right? So you've got existing military cyber experts, you've got access to infrastructure, you have academic resources and a significant talent pool here. You have incumbent firms, in other words, existing firms that are already in this space, and a very high concentration of healthcare industry, which is a heavily hacked sector that has very high demands for security. I think there's something like 44 hacks per second that are happening at any one time in the U.S. So this is, again, a great example of where the U.S. military has a need. The local universities are providing a service both in terms of workforce training and degree programs, and where private corporations, General Dynamics, Raytheon, others, are also aligned in terms of the interest and the need for workforce. So this is an area to absolutely grow, but it's just indicative of the areas where you should focus. You should absolutely diversify and find more things that you know are both uniquely needed by the military, but also can be a partnership with your local universities and can provide local jobs. What you don't want is for this all to be happening behind the gates, and it doesn't create any local jobs for local folks. So we need to figure out ways to create technological innovation that gets commercialized. In other words, tech transfer from R&D to small businesses and entrepreneurship, and creating small businesses in your downtown. You already have NSA and Department of Homeland Security National Centers for Academic Excellence in cybersecurity, and you are the center of the Regional Resource Center for the Southeast. So you're already the place in the entire Southeast for cybersecurity. And then we started mapping, right? So we're moving from like the broader like economic ideas to physical mapping. And so in general, we see like this employer belt. Significantly healthcare, but obviously military and everything related to that. But then identified as well two kind of innovation hubs, one around the University of West Florida, and then another one in the downtown. And you want to think about how this asset mapping of major employers, major innovators, arts and culture, and attractions can start to define what a downtown economy can be. When we work in innovation districts, which are tech and creative sector oriented and other places, we focus a fair amount on the cultural infrastructure of a place, because if you think about Austin and now the explosive growth in places like Nashville and even in parts of Brooklyn and Manhattan that, you know, just have never seen the kind of like tech growth before, it's sustained by a cultural infrastructure. So this is a really positive thing for you because you're unique in the region. You are a great waterfront city of a nice size and scale. So you've got a quality of life, you've got an ocean, but you've also got an urban place that has culture and restaurants and entertainment. And so we're starting to drill that down into cultural access and innovation circles into the downtown. And so we're imagining what we're calling the hashtag, which is Palafox and Jefferson crossing with Main and Cedar as two important pairs of streets that start to create a kind of 100% corner in the downtown as an important cultural access and innovation district. And think about how we can begin to populate more and more of that innovation circle as a redevelopment opportunity. And then the western end, more of a community destination circle and that cultural access that builds off of De Villiers and the work that you're going to see from SCAPE in a minute, thinking about how that creates new community destination moments along the waterfront. And then here just showing how the dark bands show where we want to thicken the activity and vibrancy of the urban edge as you walk down Main Street and Cedar and Palafox and Jefferson, like where are the places that right now have some of those voids and those gaps where we don't fill in, and then the tan shading is where redevelopment might occur. And so we're going to, in the next phase of work, start to develop where this translates into specific development opportunities and how that might create specific value. So again, in terms of the value creation from parks and open space provide a path to equitable economic development in as much as they're about health and other benefits, community cohesion, but also direct and fiscal impacts. Remember that direct value premium that's associated with proximity to the park. And again, the direct use value of having use of these new spaces. And then the potential impact of parks is not only at the immediate surrounding, but also about factors for the long-term economic revitalization of cities. So it can be property value premiums. It can be about spurring new ground-up development. What if parks created the possibility of achieving a slightly higher rent downtown so that the financing of multifamily new construction made more economic sense, and so we would start to see a little bit more of that. It would promote more tourism, job creation, talent and business attraction, and increased spending in the downtown. All of that leads to greater tax revenue which becomes a sustained source of funding, which allows you to potentially, monetize that value to pay for some of these improvements. And then just, small scale kind of moves that could be made in the short term. So I'd like to tease the mayor about his, release the prisoner that is this building. Like, you already have so many wonderful assets downtown. This is somebody had a sense of humor when they created this little miniature version of a house. And, it's sort of sadly, stuck behind this prison fence. And so maybe, I don't know anything about its history. It might need to always stay at that exact site. But, if you go to the High Museum in Atlanta, Roy Lichtenstein has this great, house, this little miniature, funny play on scale, and people love getting their selfie taken in front of it. And I was at the Venice Architectural Biennale this year, and the Swiss Pavilion was the #1 attraction because it was this crazy house that played on scale, like you were a little midget in one room and then you were a giant in another room. But again, it's this idea of taking this thing that you have and maybe sit it in your favorite spot in the park and make a selfie moment. So all of a sudden, everybody's broadcasting how much fun they're having in Pensacola. And I won't get into details here, but you've got a lot of strengths around your clustering of arts and culture. You've got a bigger than average ocean economy. You've got a strong presence of military and a pretty high concentration of students. You could do better in terms of connection between assets and spurring innovation. You definitely have opportunities to drive the economy around R&D and things related to security industry. And your threats are, the competition from other vibrant small cities that have more culture, more infrastructure for co-working, for innovation, for entrepreneurship, for venture capital. Those are all things that can be cultivated by partnership among the different players, again, in private sector, government, and academia working together. But again, it all leads back to this circle of various uses that all come together to create livability and vibrancy that include greater quality housing choices at different price points, including affordable housing, public spaces, sense of community, amplifying your cultural pride, and focusing on innovation in all aspects, everything from industry to the arts, and continuing to focus on ways to create job growth. So I will stop there and turn it back to Gina. And I guess next time I'm back, we'll talk more about the specific economic of the specific catalytic projects that you're going to hear more about. Thank you.
Great. And so, thank you, James, for kind of contextualizing that for us. I think we want to share now how we're trying to take all of this information, both the research that our team has been doing, but also the feedback that we've heard from you, and translate it to your waterfront. So we have a whole series of conclusions that layer up into the documents that you see in the back, the kind of waterfront framework plan. The first is that our team, the SCAPE team, really thinks that the waterfront experience should begin at Main Street. I think today there's a general perception that the waterfront is the thing that you stand at the edge at and look over and there it is. But the waterfront is actually a much larger district and zone. It's not a line, it's an area. And in Pensacola, this is maybe a little grayed out, but you can see the 1765 map of downtown Pensacola. You see the historic fort location. And there's a very important thing, the historic bluffs shown along the line here. And you can really see how today's Main Street, shown in this red line, traces the alignment of the historic bluffs. And then over time, since that map was created, historic piers have been built out and developed. So we see the figure that represents the city of Pensacola today. It's a little bit more familiar. But so our assumption and our kind of provocation here is that the waterfront does not begin here at the end of one of these piers or pile fields or at the edge of Maritime Park or the perimeter of Bruce Beach, it really begins within the city, along Main Street, along that historic bluff line, because this is the constructed waterfront district and a historic zone. These are just some evocative images of that change, of that ecological change and cultural change, this kind of newly created land that was developed, these like large piers that came out of a series of bluff systems. This is a photograph a little bit further away from the waterfront, but kind of gives the same idea of those cascading bluffs that once moved into the city's edge, and really kind of created this zone, this waterfront zone, which is really special and part of a transformative waterfront design. One thing I think that's interesting about the Main Street experience today is that while Main Street traces this historic edge, I think very few people, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think very few people really realize that when you ride or walk along Main Street. It is very much dominated by the perception of vehicles, and I think Main Street itself, unlike some of your other great streets like Palafox and De Villers, really lacks a strong identity. And so we want to bring back an identity to Main Street that introduces the wider Pensacola waterfront. And that's about transforming Main Street into a shared Bayfront Boulevard that connects pedestrians, bicyclists, and vehicles in the same space, that really creates this connective thread that stitches its way through the city of Pensacola, east to west and west to east, that connects diverse and separated neighborhoods. So many of those neighborhoods that James mentioned in his presentation that hold the assets of this community, Belmont, De Villiers, the Tanyards, downtown, Old East Hill, Oak Point, this kind of very interesting collection of neighborhoods could really be connected by this new pedestrian and bicycle network. It would also link downtown Pensacola's waterfront destinations and views, great spaces that already exist along the waterfront today. And it would provide the public infrastructure for future urban development. A lot of what James was speaking about in terms of investment in the region and connecting it to the waterfront experience. There's a huge number of parcels and properties in this very area that have potential to create stronger street frontages, denser development, and really build upon the assets of the waterfront itself and this investment in Main Street, and really continue the intensity of what is already happening along Palafox and kind of reorient that east-west to connect to a much wider series of waterfront destinations. And so that's a really key piece of this project and proposal. Other cities have done this. So James has already mentioned Newport, and so we did a little scale comparison of some cities. So if you look up on the screen, you can see Pensacola in this box here, and you can see Newport in this box here. So they are at the same scale. So we're going to compare your city to a lot of other cities all over the world tonight. And what you'll see is that Main Street is shown in red here, and Newport has a similar street called Thames Street, which runs along it, and it has a similar collection of historic piers, all with little destinations along them, but the connective thread is really that Thames Street or that Main Street connection. And we really feel that Main Street can be a much stronger, much more walkable, much more lively connection here in Pensacola. It works in Newport because there's a really great mix of scales and styles of architecture, but strong street front presence, something that I think you've heard from many other lecturers that have come to Civic Con presentations. But there's also piers like shown on the right image here, which feel much more connected and water-based and like pier destinations, walking destinations that really stick out into the water, create places to get on boats, but also create places to sit and eat and enjoy the waterfront itself. Other cities have done this at very different scales. So one example is Toronto, shown on the bottom here. So if anyone's visited the Toronto waterfront, you'll know that it has a really great series of pier-based waterfront destinations, all connected by a continuous public path, shown in green here, but also connected by the strong pedestrian, bicyclist, and multimodal spine behind it, just like we're proposing in downtown Pensacola. In Toronto, that infrastructure is bigger. It's also more expensive. It's a much bigger city with many more people. But it fundamentally, I think, has the same concepts of the more modest proposal that we're suggesting here for Pensacola. It has park infrastructure that extends like fingers into the water, but it also has multimodal transportation infrastructure, wide sidewalks, curbless environments that enable more flexibility between spaces, a two-way bike lane, dedicated transit lanes, as well as spaces for vehicles. Right behind this bus is kind of blocking the view there. You can see the vehicles here. The other thing it has is a kind of infrastructure for long-term tree growth, which is something we can talk about in downtown Pensacola as well, really trying to enhance canopy and this feeling of continuous shade along Main Street to really make it a great place to walk and to linger throughout all of the seasons that this city faces. And so I'll just move through some of these images, which are zoom-ins of the plan shown in more detail on the map in the back of the room there. But you can really see how this investment in a continuous public realm, modifications to Bayfront Boulevard, different cross-sections of Bayfront Boulevard, really reconfigured to be from what today is a very vehicular-dominated environment to a proposal of actually reducing the median width, rearranging the vehicular lanes, and creating more space for bicycle and pedestrian activity along the edge, really creating a safe and comfortable public realm along Bayfront that really makes a great and connected piece of linear transportation infrastructure. I'll do the existing to the proposed again. And you can see, even in this proposal, we're not proposing a huge amount of lane squishing or shifting. We're simply reconfiguring how these lanes are aligned within this space. This is the same along Main Street, where we can think about different cross-section iterations that would allow for enhanced tree cover, which would reduce urban heat island effect and really make Pensacola a cooler, shadier city throughout the summer, but also create space for bike lanes and other transportation options. So again, before and after. I think one of the major goals embedded in this proposal to kind of begin waterfront at Main Street is really that it will create continuous public access along the waterfront. Main Street is the fast path along the waterfront, but we also feel we need a slower path along the waterfront that truly gets you to that kind of that edge-like moment, like right up against the water's edge. This is something that many of the cities we've studied have, and it provides an enormous benefit to the overall community. So we did a little mapping of downtown Pensacola today. So we're over here at Sanders Beach, and you can see some other great landmarks like Maritime Park, the port, Bayfront today, and the bridge here, Bruce Beach right here. And we noted this diagram with great access. So that means you can actually walk to the edge as a member of the public and go on the property and enjoy the waterfront. Limited access, which is pink, which I think is an area, for example, along Bayfront where you technically can go there, but you might feel a little unsafe or might not quite have the space that you need or really have the pedestrian infrastructure like shade and protection from cars that people desire. And then no access, which is simply private ownership or land uses that prevent public access. And what you can see from this diagram is that there is a fair amount of great public access and great park space along the waterfront, but it is fragmented and disconnected. And while the proposal for Main Street would really help kind of connect it to the urban core, we also propose, so again, some of these spaces, we also propose to create linear, fine-grain connectivity around and through many of these major waterfront destinations, really linking all of these assets to one another and create this much more circuitous, much more recreation-based way of connecting from point A to point B as an experience and as a journey, not as a straight shot or as a kind of mode of commuting, basically. And so kind of creating this waterfront trail or bay walk, which is what we're calling it, would really create this wonderful waterfront experience for Pensacola. You could take a sunset walk along the water and not leave for an hour and always see different parts of the water. And it would connect these existing resources that exist today. And so again, in many of the major cities that we've looked at, this is an asset or a feature that they are offering to their residents as something that helps connect people and connect place and creating more kind of mixing grounds and places for meeting and experiencing the wider community of Pensacola as well as its wider ecosystems. So this is the Foreshore Walk in Sydney, Australia. So we also got some other international examples for you, different continents. So here in Sydney, you can see there's this kind of connective spine road, but also a really circuitous, really lovely, very urban walk along the waterfront that really kind of creates different destinations and those different loops that James was mentioning that have different activities and things along them. And so these are different images showing a kind of more naturalized experience with get downs and water access and lots of planting, as well as a more urban experience, which you could imagine being like Palafox Pier, walking along the edge, going to Plaza de Luna and having a very active and present space with things to do, places to sit, whether you want to buy a coffee or whether you just want to sit and enjoy the waterfront for free. These are very important kind of things to offer as a city. And so this continuous waterfront walk is shown in our plans as this little blue line, this kind of filigree line. Well, we're proposing a kind of higher speed and more transportation-oriented biking and walking experience along Main Street and Bayfront. We're also proposing the secondary blue path, this kind of slower, more serendipitous trail that weaves you through many new emerging assets along the waterfront and connects existing destinations. So this is a before kind of picture of the space here along Bayfront and an after sketch showing how these two systems, the kind of main multi-use or shared lane for pedestrians and bicyclists shown here could also be connected to a smaller pedestrian-only path or trail or bay walk that would link these different neighborhoods and parks together. So this continuous bay walk would move downtown as well. And you can see the Main Street improvements following east-west, really linking up Bruce Beach with Maritime Park and with what we're calling Palafox Pier, where Plaza de Luna is today, as well as potential proposed improvements at the port and at Bartram's Park. How this could also be a kind of transformative concept and a transformed space. A space today that really feels like if you're here, you're trying to get to somewhere else. You might be driving through, you might be trying to go to Palafox, you might be going to a waterfront destination, but right now there's nothing really suggesting that this is the core of this community or this is the historic bluff location, and this is really the kind of foundational moment of Pensacola itself. There's some great civic historic architecture, but really want to propose to connect it with this great civic landscape infrastructure of bikeways, of squeezed vehicular lanes, of stormwater collection, of planted area. Along the waterfront edges, for example, really thinking about how we can better connect all the people that come to Joe Patty's to Pensacola and get people walking around more. So could we create a little pocket plaza or landscape or streetscape improvement closer to Joe Patty's to give people a place to go outside with their recent seafood purchase and sit at a park bench or walk to Bruce Beach and enjoy the waterfront experience. Really try to expand that opportunity and destination loops that are within the community. We've also really looked at how to stitch this trail along Cypress and back to Sanders Beach and the Yacht Club, as well as potentially to the American Creosote site in the future. So this is more of maybe a soon or eventually strategy. This is probably not happening tomorrow because there's a lot of planning, effort, and investment happening around remediating that site. But there are some very interesting retired rail spur potential connections and future connections that could really help link what's happening downtown along the waterfront to wider regional assets like Bayou Chico and other water bodies along the Pensacola waterfront. So we see a lot of opportunity and potential in this proposal. We also want to transform the waterfront into an everyday destination for all. We know that people come to the waterfront today for a wide range of activities, but we've realized a lot of them are very event-driven. So you might drive to the waterfront to have a meal along one of the great restaurants that, where you can watch the sunset over the water, kind of like we're doing this evening. You might come to the waterfront for a ball game at Maritime Park, a great event. You might come to go fishing at Plaza de Luna. But for the most part, I think people are coming to the waterfront to do a thing and then leave, as opposed to have a wider connective experience. And it's not necessarily, unless you live downtown, it's not necessarily an everyday piece of the average Pensacola's life. And so we think there's a huge opportunity, while there are great things happening, there's huge opportunity to really expand the range of things that people need on an everyday basis. Like, what are great routes and circulation pathways to walk your dog along the waterfront? What are great things to do that would enable you to use the waterfront at different times of day? For example, to go bird watching along the Bayfront Boulevard. To have a coastal walk along Maritime Park that's planted with lush native species to create a more immersive waterfront experience. We also want to create new destinations along the waterfront that really encourage intergenerational exchange, lingering, and everyday use by all. So I was just kind of building up on these images of the assets that we have today. The assets that we could enhance with small improvements like adding a kayak launch or a space to actually get to the water at Bartram's Park, or enhancing birdwatching opportunities along Bayfront, to actually creating new spaces, new destinations along the waterfront that serve this wider audience. And many of those kind of facets of that wider audience, James has already mentioned. The kind of concept of creating an educational pier or space along the port that could really help connect the dots between education, youth, and the emerging ocean-based economy. So we have some precedents and examples for that. That's just one example. But I think another thing that really relates to creating a stronger neighborhood and a stronger waterfront is about improving community connections to the water. So to make it possible to simply walk to the water, to create sidewalk and streetscape improvements to really enhance the experience of getting to the water, not just the experience of the waterfront itself. And so our team has been working very closely with the city and others to identify key urban corridors. Corridors, I think, like Palafox, which most people know is a kind of key urban corridor, a lot of investment, a lot of development activity happening there, as well as Jefferson. But other urban corridors like De Villers and A Street and E Street that really link in westernmost points of the city and connect them to the emerging waterfront as a series of destinations. And so we've been looking at different cities that are kind of creating momentum and pulling economic energy down street corridors onto piers. We've been looking at St. Pete's Pier, also a Florida example, where an existing pier kind of pulls from the city fabric and has a lot of programming and plans for its improvement to create a whole series of water-based destinations that combine active waterfront use like fishing and bait with park-like experiences that really create these transformative paths to pull people out to the water. So that's just one example, but we think there's a huge potential in downtown Pensacola for creating a greater density of destinations and attractions. So a couple of them I'll just point out. I've already mentioned a potential education pier that aligns with some of the planning that's been happening around the port of how to diversify uses there and really create a hub for a water-based educational economy to emerge. Really thinking about this pier here as Palafox Pier, extending the energy of what's happening on Palafox down, trying to consolidate and redevelop some of the underutilized parking lots that exist along that large pier. Really thinking about reducing parking within the space of Plaza de Luna and using it as a community gathering space, replacing places that are taken up by cars today with places for people, so there's just simply more access to the waterfront. It's incredible view, incredible space. Some small enhancements to help add more texture and planted diversity to Maritime Park, make it part of a coastal walk and coastal native plants walk that really can celebrate local ecology of the region. And then I think Bruce Beach is huge on this list. By far, it was one of the most brought up projects by almost every community group and city group that we met. The recent improvements that have happened, opening up to the public, I think is such a great test and kind of trigger for the potential that this space offers. But Bruce Beach really has the ability to be a huge community asset that hosts a wide diversity and variety of activities that really serves its local neighborhoods and brings energy to the west side of the city, which I think is so important for spreading the kind of investment across the wider city spectrum. And so these are just some images of different ways that other cities have kind of addressed these kind of challenges of engaging with the water and using the water differently. We just put up some images so we can have some things to talk to, like floating pools in Copenhagen and Denmark that extend off of existing piers and create places for people to safely get in the water itself. Why not have a place to swim that is safe and regulated in downtown Pensacola? Smaller scale infrastructure, maybe a little more modest of a proposal. This is a project close to where I live in Beacon, New York. It's a kayak storage pavilion that's designed in a way that it can flood when it needs to, but it holds the kayaks and is a very simple but very meaningful piece of community infrastructure. Bruce Beach, I think, could potentially hold a space like this that could be co-designed by the wider community and provide a lot of recreational benefit back to its neighbors. And then I also mentioned the Harbor School and the educational pier. So this is a kind of concept that we see potentially applying to the port area. The Harbor School is a school in New York that bases their whole curriculum around the waterfront. We collaborate with them on a number of projects. They do large-scale oyster restoration throughout New York Harbor. Instead of a basketball team as a high school, they have a scuba team. So they learn this really wide variety of skill sets. But they also have a physical space on the water where they train students and they work with students, and students train others to build a maritime economy. So graduates of the Harbor School, some go off to colleges to study marine biology, some drive water taxis in New York Harbor. It's a really great asset for the community. It relates to the water, and we think there's great potential for that here in Pensacola. And this is the type of program and intergenerational educational exchange that we're proposing potentially on the redeveloped port area here, trying to create this kind of marker and public space and potentially school that will be highly visible as you come in along Bayfront and have this view of the emerging downtown. And so those are just some of the destinations and connections. And we know that this project is not only going to be advanced by this study. These are just some thoughts and ideas. And we're very excited that the city is actually working on taking already some of these concepts forward and is ahead of us a little bit in advancing some of these schemes. So we're trying very much to work in partnership and work in tandem with their ideas and concepts, especially concepts for the Jefferson corridor in terms of reconfiguring the cross sections here to reduce the extent of space that's taken up by parked cars, but still allow for a little bit of parking, but introducing bike lanes along the street as well as tree planting. Also, De Villers Cultural Connector, really thinking about trying to squish some massive traffic lanes and create more space for people, more space for planted green infrastructure investments, and more space for cultural interpretation, really revealing the kind of diverse, interesting qualities of these neighborhoods. And then also A Street, before and an after proposal for simple ways to reconfigure street cross sections to enable civic life and pedestrian space. There's also spaces like Cedar Street, which are intuitive, almost kind of set up conditions that require discussion with the wider community about how to use and how to access, but I think are here in terms of being a kind of potential space to use, and they're already informally used by many, as you can see with the desire line kind of cutting across the way. So there are these kind of almost like secret garden-like moments that lay the infrastructure for these wider connections. And then finally, Bruce Beach, I think one of these potentially very iconic park destinations within the downtown fabric, within Pensacola's fabric, to really have a beach that is a destination, cultural asset, and an educational space for all residents of Pensacola that is along the bay, a kind of beach for the city, a smaller scale beach for the city itself. We think this is an incredibly powerful idea, and it is one of the catalytic projects that we think we're suggesting to move forward, to how improvements could be made to really create stronger links, stronger connections. For example, small infrastructure of a bridge over Waterfront Creek to really link back to the wider bay walk. Those are just the kind of beginnings of ideas, and we'd like to work with you over the next couple of months to carry those forward. And so as we do all of this work, we also think we want to advance and translate Pensacola's ecological and cultural history into physical space. This relates back a little bit to thinking about a plant palette for the trees and then the vegetation selected for the downtown waterfront, trying to make sure that it's picking up on this interesting array of native species that once existed along these coastal bluffs. But it's also about the incredible cultural diversity and multiculturalism that has emerged over many, many centuries in downtown Pensacola, and make sure that history is represented equitably and in a very layered and kind of meaningful way across the city itself. And so as we propose investments like the Main Street connector or Main Street spine, we really want to make sure that onto that some of the narrative experiences of all of the residents of Pensacola, tying back to some of the stories of the Bruce Pool in the 1950s, can actually be integrated into the physical fabric of the city and told. And so we've been already starting to reach out to residents and kind of learn about different histories and different generations of people that have lived in Pensacola, and we're starting to collect stories that could be embedded in some way along these proposed park improvements. So, for example, as installations of public art on vertical surfaces that create new community identities, but also engraved in more subtle ways in some of the actual more permanent paving materials that might be proposed for the downtown. And then I'm going to kind of end this proposal around the waterfront around how we can think long-term about an urban resilience strategy for the region and for the city. We know that the waterfront and all these investments that we're proposing are potentially vulnerable to sea level rise, local flooding, and major storm events, and that's something that's very important to consider, both with new investments in landscape infrastructure, but also new investments in any new buildings or development downtown. We also know that the vulnerabilities really align with historic ecological patterns. So if we look at some of the areas that have flooded more recently and areas that have come up with our community-generated map of zones vulnerable to flooding, we can really see that many of them align with some of the historic streams, like Waterfront Creek, for example, that shape and frame the city. And so we really need to think about investing in living infrastructure projects that improve today's quality of life, all the things I've just mentioned, but also increase long-term resilience. So more kind of ecosystem-centric ways of managing and dealing with water, but also developing urban space. And so we have a variety of proposals embedded in this project. One is the proposal to expand Project Green Shore to continue the oyster reef and layered coastal protection infrastructure all the way down to the port area. To think about adapting some of the more vertical surfaces for habitat improvements. We've met with a gentleman that's restoring oysters and using new technology to restore oysters, and his home base is set up on the port right now, so there's local technology available to do this along some of these vertical bulkhead walls. And we're also looking to propose a restoration of a larger scale maritime bluff forest around and in Bruce Beach, potentially into Maritime Park, and along edges of Sanders as well, to really get this layered ecological kind of protection in place. But we also know that it has to happen on the urban side as well, that we need resilient zoning and building codes for any new development that occurs within the waterfront district, that base flood elevations need to be appropriately lifted and accommodate future projections for water and hurricane events. And there's some great examples of cities all over the country that are beginning to do this, designing very carefully for flood resilience. And I know Pensacola is actually pretty well adapted to many of the major hurricanes that come through, but other cities are beginning to layer in more advanced strategies for dealing with sea level rise and groundwater change as well. And I think both New York and other parts of Florida are beginning to look at these, and we really feel this is a much larger civic conversation that needs to be had, that the waterfront district is the perfect testing ground for. And so we're putting that out there as a way of kind of connecting the goals of ecology and habitat building with goals of making urban resilience kind of part of your building and zoning code within downtown. We see that as a strong recommendation. So I think we've talked about a lot this evening, and I really appreciate all of your patience kind of hearing and receiving all of this information. What is shown here is all of those concepts stitched and layered together. So the concept of beginning the waterfront at Main Street, projects can be pieced out into what we call and prioritized into phased investments over time. And we like to use this framing of what can be done now, what can be done soon, and what can be done eventually, because some projects have different planning timescales than others. And so this is a kind of just first pass and first selection. You might feel differently about which project should be transforming that from something which is negative in the community today to a positive to this community in the future, creating new recreational space and making sure that there's strong planning and design and kind of linking these different assets together, that any investments made in the cleanup of that site tie back and build off the waterfront. Finally, we see, again, huge potential to have wider connections to Bayou Chico and to other bayous, potentially even Bayou Tahar on the east side, to really think about a future scaling up of this proposal and plan. And so that is what brings us kind of to the full plan that we're showing, and it's just a kind of teaser of how it could roll out over time. But we're really looking forward to your feedback. We have also really been thinking about what projects we should continue to advance during the process over the next couple of months with all of you in the room. And we have met with many community leaders. Many of yourself in the room have been on conference calls with us talking about the positives and negatives of different projects. And with much of your collective feedback, we have landed on 2 catalytic projects to advance. You can tell us whether you think they're the correct ones. We hope to hear that feedback. But the first is Bruce Beach, which I've already mentioned, potentially quite a catalytic and transformational project, a stronger investment to really create more equitable public space all along Pensacola's waterfront. And then the project that James mentioned, the Waterfront hashtag connector, really investing in extending the energy of what's happening on Palafox, both south to the waterfront, but also east and west along Main Street, to really make Main Street and Cedar these connective spines that connect the existing assets of the waterfront today. And with that, we have a zoom in of these 2 projects and these 2 images, and we design development on what elements those projects should hold, what they should offer back to this community. We'll also be looking at cost estimates of what these projects would cost the community, but also what their benefits would be. And then we'll identify different implementation pathways, different partners necessary to kind of get at the table to really see these projects through to fruition. Because I think, you know, what we find really meaningful in this work is the potential of this waterfront space, not only to be a kind of great place to live, work, and play, but also to be a plan that really helps make change in this community and position you in a way that respects and reflects the past, but also acknowledges and embraces the future. And so I think with that, I want to thank all of you for listening to us this evening. I know there was a lot of talking, but I think we feel very excited about the potential of this waterfront plan and working with you very much hand in hand to make it a reality. Thank you. I think let's do a couple questions. Yeah.
Hello? Yeah, sorry. Sorry for the standing room only. We had about 300 reservations, and we usually have 20, 25% no-shows. Everybody showed. We had over 300 people here tonight, so I apologize for that. We have drawings over there. A couple of Gina's folks are over there. You can also fill out comment paper, and you probably can ask questions. Take a question or two now before we break up, if anybody has one. Yes.
How secure is going to include Spring Street, which
Yeah, so just to repeat your question, there was a question about why we didn't include Spring Street as opposed to De Villers or A Street or some of the other connections to Maritime Park. I mean, I think the reality is that it would be great if all of the streets connected, and that I think is very much a goal in the future. We worked with the city to identify a couple of the key corridors that we knew there was energy and already some city attention around. We also tried to choose streets that could be reconfigured not only for pedestrian improvements but also for bicycle improvements to really improve that overall network. And so the streets that really kind of rose to the top that made it into the larger framework were the streets that we showed. But I don't think that, you know, goes to the exclusion of any investments in other streets as well, because ideally every street would have a strong connection to the waterfront. We're just trying to suggest places where we could start first.
Okay, thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming tonight. And don't forget to fill out the surveys on your chairs. We'd appreciate it very much.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, and if these slides I know were hard to see from the back of the room, all these slides are on the P&J website, the Pensacola News Journal website, so you can see up close and personal. Thank you.